Icon Church. Welcome today to Icon Church. And let me just say this. Happy church anniversary to all of you. This is our 5th birthday. Give yourselves a round of applause. Yes, we have made it to 5. So that's a big deal around here. Man, it is crazy to think that 5 years ago, right now, we were launching Icon Church. There are a million reasons why we shouldn't be here today. In fact, I was doing some research on statistics of church startups, church plants this week, and then I was going to share them, and I got depressed as I was looking them up, and I thought, you know what? We're not going to share those today because the reality is, the truth could be, we should be one of those statistics. I mean, there's a ton of reasons why we shouldn't be here today, and yet, for whatever reason, God has brought us to where we are today.
And whenever someone approaches us, maybe someone like that wants to plant a church, or they kind of want to know, how are you making it? Like, what is one of the most important things that we need to know? And I always say, it's all about your team. It's all about your team. And I know for a fact that we would not be here. The main reason why we are here today is because of the team that we had around us when we first started this thing. I mean, we started in our living room with about 20 people. Some were like videoing in over Skype, and some were actually there in the living room. And we just approached them and said, hey, we can't promise you a job. We can't even promise you this church is going to work. But will you leave everything and move down to Texas with us to see if we can do this? And
a great sales pitch, I know, right? Like that's really where you want to go with things. Like, it's probably not going to work. You can't have a job or a place to live. Oh yeah, we don't know anyone, but you want to come? So maybe not the best sales pitch, yeah.
So the launch team, they really are the true heroes behind the whole start, the whole genesis of Icon. I mean, they gave up everything. They moved to a place they didn't know anybody. They found jobs. They found places to live and just served like crazy to see the church go from a living room to what it is today. And we have a really special treat for you today, and that there are some launch team members that are actually still here, a part of Icon, and some that have moved on, but we've invited as many as we could get to come here today to be with you. And we'll call them up on the stage here in just a second, but can you do me a favor and give them a huge round of applause, because they have served tirelessly and made this thing happen. So launch team, go ahead and come on up on the stage.
Yes, this is the OG launch team. It goes way back. Kind of crazy that we're able to get a good chunk of them here. There's about a half of them that weren't able to make it. Some were traveling because of Labor Day. Some live out of state and wouldn't fly in, but they couldn't make it for various reasons. But this really was the original launch team that kicked off Icon Church 5 years ago, but really started meeting and started gathering in our living room. Even further back before that, we moved here about 6 years ago, and then started meeting, gathering in our home in Illinois 6.5 years ago. In fact, this is one of the first pictures that we ever took of the launch team. This is a bunch of babies that decided we're going to start a church. And I'd like to take a moment to point out Benji's sweet hair, right? Like, I think he should go back to the old school Bieber look and, kind of swipe it. That's my thought, but I don't know. But this was it, right? I mean, imagine, like, that was the team. This is the group that started Icon Church from scratch. There were people that would gather in our living room, and then some people that would Skype in because they lived in Colorado or Baltimore or all across the country. And before we all moved here, we would get together and talk about and dream what Icon might become. And I don't think any of us would ever envision what God has done. And what's so crazy to me is not that everyone decided to move down, but there were some people that left jobs, careers, places at great churches, gave up everything to move down. In fact, Adam and Stacy were one of the couples that moved the furthest to be a part of Icon. They were in Baltimore. That's where their hometown was. They had family there. They had great jobs. They had, like money, and they had all these things. And they gave all of that up to move halfway across the country, thousands of miles, to be a part of this. So, Adam, what was going through you and Stacy's mind? Hopefully not drugs, but what was going through your mind to give up all of that and to come down and be a part of Icon Church?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I want to say is we didn't give up the best football team in the
All right, that's enough. We got that.
I intentionally wore this to rub it in your face. No, but like you said, we had careers. I had made really good money, and Stacy and I at 25 were making 6 figures, and we thought, man, we arrived. And before that, we were part of 2 startups with nonprofits and a church plant, and we were actually fundraising. So we were writing letters and scrounging, and we got to this point where we were just making great money. And for whatever reason, on my drive to work, I thought ministry will never pay this much money. And it wasn't that statement was true, it was my heart at the time. And I went home to Stacy and said, look, we've got to change something. It's our community that we're in. We're not plugged in. We're not connected. And the things that aren't important, we're making a priority, which for us at the time was money. And so we went out to dinner, and while we were sitting at dinner trying to figure out what the next step looked like for us, Dan shot out this huge email blast to a lot of his alumni from a program he had run a few years ago. And we were just on that email. And so I was like, Stace, we should figure out if this is something that we could do. And we had talked about it and decided to give Dan a call, and we're like, hey, surprise, we're going to jump in and join the team. Like, you don't have to ask us. And so, we just committed to doing that, and, we said, hey, look, like maybe the finances, maybe that's not as important as this community that we should be a part of. And so that was the biggest factor for us.
I think that's so amazing to think in the world's eyes, the thing that culture says matters the most, they said that's not enough, and that's not what we want to chase after. But there was a vision that God was calling them to apart from that. And I think that's a testament to who they are. Adam serves as one of our elders of the church and has just been an incredible asset through the years as a church. But it wasn't just the people that moved halfway across the country that started Icon. When we landed here, there was also some people that we added to the team. In fact, the first 3 people that we added to the team here from Texas was Sarah, Anthony, and Daniel. And it was so cool watching them jump on and just go all in. It was kind of crazy because, again, those of us that had been together meeting for 6-9 months had created this community, but they jumped right into it. And for whatever reason, decided to join in. And Sarah, I'm so curious, if you'll talk maybe just a little bit about what was it that kind of drew you in? Why did you decide to be a part of a church plant, to be a part of Icon?
So for me at the time, I was in college, and I didn't know anything about any of these people. And I kind of met Kelly on accident, these people. It was like a friend of a friend, and we were hanging out, and Dan walks in with some of the launch team, and they were talking about this children's ministry they wanted to start at an elementary school. And at the time, I had plans to move, like I was going to graduate, and I had some job connections, and I was going to go. But I was just listening in to what they were talking about, and it was just, I knew that it was special, and I knew that whatever was happening, that I really wanted to be a part of it. And so I just kept showing up to meetings, even ones that I was not invited to, leadership meetings. I would show up and be like, what are these guys talking about? And I eventually committed to it because it was so special. And it's really easy to look at this picture of people and see what Icon is today and know that God did do something really, really special. But it's also really easy to look over the difficulty that we all endured in that. When you have a group this size and we're all really young and really broke and really petty and all of the things that you can be when you're young, you have to really want the mission and really love each other. And it's hard. We were not always the nicest to each other. At the time, the worship team was me and Benji and Nicole, and Benji and I didn't really get along for a long time. And so when you're a team of 3, you have to endure each other and love each other. And that's what was so special about it, because if we had not have really loved God and loved each other, even when we didn't always like each other, this could never have happened.
Yep.
And that is so special and something that you want to be a part of, and something that I felt like I had to be a part of. And so that was for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's so funny that Sarah mentions community and talking about doing things together. I'm actually kind of going there in my message, so thank you, Sarah, for setting me up there at the end. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about community, but before we talk about all the places that we're going and what God has done, I'm going to walk you through a little history of Icon. Can we just one more time give the team a huge round of applause? Thank you guys for all you do. Appreciate you guys. I also need you to get the couch off the stage. So it's not like you guys didn't have to set up and tear down for 3 years, so you're used to this. So I'll let you guys have at it. I don't break anything. Man, it is so cool to kind of look back at kind of old pictures. And over the past week, I've been doing that as I've been preparing for this week. And and looking at things that we had written down as a small team meeting in our living room, and the visions and the dreams that we had, and to see how God has even surpassed those things. And it's amazing, and I want to take you through a little trip down memory lane for Icon Church. Some of you have just started coming within the past few months or in the past year, and so you may not know some of this history, but we actually originally launched, here's a little piece of Icon Church trivia for you. Our very first venue outside of Kelly and I's living room, as we moved out, we ran into this problem. We were in San Marcos, and I don't know if you know this, but there's not a whole lot of meeting spaces in San Marcos that are free or really, really cheap, which is about our budget. And we were looking for a space, and the only space we could find, our very first venue outside of our living room, we met on the square of San Marcos at the Tap Room Bar in their side room. This was our first venue as a church. We were the church at the bar. So we started at Tap Room. They said, hey, listen, if you'll come get some appetizers and stuff, it'll be free. So I said, free? I like the sound of that, right? Adam, one of our elders, he had this saying early on, and to this day, if it's free, it's for me. So we kind of operated in that mentality, and we thought this sounds like a great place. So we started meeting there. This was a few years ago when cell phone cameras were apparently that bad. So I think that was taken on a flip phone. But this was early on. We first started off in a bar, and we talked about the reason we met there is God kind of opened these doors. We said, we want to be the kind of church that reaches out to people that would never darken the doors of a church. So in fact, our very first venue, we said Jesus was a regular at places that the religious community never goes to. What would it look like for us to become regulars and serve and love these people? In fact, we wanted the bartenders, we wanted the waiters and waitresses, when they saw the church come, to know, hey, we're going to get really good tips, as opposed to other experiences that many waiters and waitresses have. And that's where things started. We started from there. Also back then, our kids' church consisted of, well, Kelly and I's kids. Like, that was it. We're the only ones with kids. So for kids' church, again, it was that team. We did everything. My sister Angie, who is our kids pastor, she was busy in Illinois getting another degree, like you do. And so she would prepare all the lessons plans as she was still going back to school and send them down to the team, and different people would rotate through and kind of serve in the kids area. He's not here today, but one of our launch team members, a guy by the name of Tyler, you know, the guy that does the videos, Tyler, he serves sometimes in kids' church. And I found this amazing picture of Tyler during kids' church. I'm sure he doesn't mind at all us sharing this picture at all. He's not here to complain. He's traveling on Labor Day, so he can find out when he watches it. But this was Tyler. This is what we did. You know, it wasn't like, hey, let's get the volunteer team for eKids. It was us. You know, we just kind of did it. All of us jumped in. Don't worry, you don't have to do this anymore if you decide to serve in eKids. This isn't like a prerequisite. Our eKids has gotten a lot better since those days. I hope so, because also my oldest daughter, Elena, broke both her arm and her foot during kids' church in those launch team days. So don't worry, if your kids are back there, they won't break anything. So things have gotten better. But we started from real humble beginnings. When we launched 5 years ago, we started off at Texas Old Town, a wedding venue on the other side of 35. And this was one of our very first Sundays. This is kind of where it started 5 years ago. There's a handful of you that were there in those days, and we did our best with what we had. And we were there for a year and a half, and we actually began to outgrow that wedding venue. It was interesting because there was 4 different buildings on the property, and how we got such a good deal on the land. Our rent back then, get this, this is a God thing. Our rent was $100 a month to meet in this space. And that was one of the few reasons we were able to keep going and to keep investing into the community to the degree that we were. But we'd have to move around. If there was a wedding in one building, we'd be in the next one. And so we just told people, come to Texas Old Town and we'll point you the way. You know, it was just, we did our best with what we had. We outgrew that, and then we moved to Goodnight Middle School. We moved here to Goodnight. And this is where we were at next for another year and a half. But the thing is, we didn't do the best always at choosing timing on things. So we made the transition to Goodnight Middle School in May of 2015, which, if you remember, it was Memorial Day 2015, which is when the floods hit. So actually our very first Sunday was this. This was us on our first Sunday. I also apparently needed some protein and creatine back then. But I was bitter because we got flooded out. I spent an hour trying to get to the building, and then I realized that this flood was way worse than any of us realized. And we were all flooded out that first Sunday. And again, we just did what we could with what we had there at Goodnight. And for a year and a half began to grow and found out, we realized we needed a space of our own. For several reasons, there were some problems and some issues coming up, and we knew God was leading us to another place. So in the spring of 2016, we launched the For Our City Capital Campaign to raise funds for what would hopefully become a permanent location. And what was so crazy is we decided we knew God was going to give us this permanent location, but we didn't know where. So we launched this campaign with just the hopes that God would provide something. And 6 months later, we were meeting in this building. It was not at all what we expected. It was not at all the timeline we expected. So we had to work extra hard. And what was amazing is in those early days, it was the launch team that allowed us to get to where we are. But really, to get to this next phase during For Our City, to get into this permanent location here at 400 Old Post Road, it took all of you. So many of you have given sacrificially to this campaign to allow us to be in this space. We wouldn't be here today without you. In the coming weeks, we'll talk a little bit more about For Our City and where we're going in the future and our vision for the future. But I just want to thank you and thank this team for everything that they've done. You see, we went from this little team, this little group of people. It was basically a small group, just meeting together in a home, and God used that to get us here. You see, this was that small group. This is actually our very first baptism service where Anthony, Daniel, and Sam got baptized. 3 of the guys that were up here were the very first people we baptized before we ever had a church service. See, this was a small group. To do baptisms back then, we went to a park and we grilled out. That was community for us. This was our small group, and God used that team to bring us to the next point, to bring us to where we are today. See, it was that small group of people that believed that God could do something if they would just let themselves be used by him that brought us to where we are today. See, and God just continued to do that. On our very first egg drop, we decided we wanted to do this community event for our city, and this is what it was, and it was amazing. It was way more than we expected. I think we had around 2,000 people show up. And for our tiny little church, we drained our entire bank account just to serve the community and do an incredible event for them. And it started there. And then this year at our egg drop, we had over 9,000 people show up from the community. Again, just because people were willing to show up and be used. That small group of people. We started in Texas Old Town. We started in a wedding venue, and we'd move around building to building, and it was crazy. Kids were in a different building than the adults. So if you had children, if you showed up as a guest, it's like, hey, your kids are actually 200 yards that way, and you're going to be over here. I promise we're not a cult. You know, like, we're not creepy. Like, we'll take good care of them. We went from there to now we have a 20,000 square foot building sitting on 14 acres next to I-35. And it's amazing that we're able to lease this space, but as we look forward, we want to become owners. We want to take the next step forward, but we wouldn't be able to make it to this step if it weren't for that launch team. We wouldn't be able to be here at this place we are now without so many of you. You see, as I look forward, there's so many things that I think we need to be doing better. There's so many things that I wish we could do that, and I wish we could partner with the community in this way, and there's all these things that I wish we could be doing and places I wish we could be. But I also have to take time to look back and be grateful from where we've came, to celebrate those moments. And I think we can all relate to that feeling where we're not where we want to be, but we're also not where we used to be. Ever recognize that in your life? You think about these things, these places that you want to go, maybe these dreams, these visions you have, and you think, man, I'm not there yet. I want to challenge you when you feel that pressure, when you feel that tension, to remember you're also not where you used to be. I realize that, man, there's a lot on your heart. There's a lot of dreams you might have for your life, but you're not where you used to be either. And I think for me over this past week, I've been doing a lot of that, looking back from where we've come as we look ahead to the future. In fact, this last series that we just did, the leadership gap, we talked about that. That gap between the leader and the person you are, and that leader and the person that you so desperately want to be. And what do you do with that gap? I want to challenge you to remember where you've come from. And you see, as I looked back as a church, we've come this huge way. I sit on the board of 4 other church plants. Lord only knows why they want me to serve on their board, but for whatever reason, I do. And I was talking to so many of them. There are so many other church plants that are so further ahead at launch than we were. I was talking to a church plant last week, and I was asking him how his budget was going, and he was telling me he got $10,000 from this church, and this person just randomly gave him $30,000, and they're giving all this, and they've got all this extra money, and I was like, man, I'm gonna send him a support letter, right? Like I was gonna give him some money, but man, I think we might need some from this guy, right? Like they're in a totally different place. I was talking about his first launch Sunday, and I'm like, you never know what you could have. You could have anywhere from, 500, 1,000 people show up. You might have 50 people show up. And he said, well, hopefully we'll have more than 50. We've got about 70 on our launch team. And I said, I hate you, right? Like gosh, man, like you 70 people? Like, man, there's so many other church plants that had so much more than we did. But yet, for whatever reason, God changed that reality for us. And he didn't do it by zapping us with a wand. He didn't do it by sprinkling some dust on us. He did it by giving us grace and courage to walk it out, to live it out, take the practical steps to do the work of the ministry. We were able to change that reality for us. And what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about those dreams and the visions that you have, that person that you want to be. Maybe that business that you want to start. Maybe it's wanting to go back to school. Whatever it is, I want you to think about that. And hopefully there's some lessons that we learned along the way that can help you as you go along your way. So I want you to think about this question: how do you change your reality? And for us, how we were able to do it, how we're able to go from a living room to where we're at today, is by choosing to become pioneers. This idea of pioneer, it's what we're calling this series as we look at what God has brought us from and look at where we're still going, because we're not done being pioneers. And the first lesson that we learned for us to be pioneers is a pioneer takes territory previously considered uninhabitable and realizes its potential. See, we had to look at something that other people saw, a frontier that other people saw as too difficult, saw as not worth it, as whatever it was, and decide to move into that. You see, whatever your dream is, you're going to have to make a decision on the front end to go for it, to take that leap of faith, to move forward. What we had to do all those years ago, the reason we met, the reason we gathered in my living room and dreamed and wrote down dreams about what Icon might be, prayed for these cities, these communities before we ever set foot on the soil, is because we knew that we had to chart our path. And you're going to have to chart your path before you ever set out. Before you ever go out after that vision, that dream that God has given you, you've got to chart the path now. See, I was able to go back and to look at old notes, things that we had written down about the church. And as I was going back through some old journals, I found something that I'd written down, a dream that I had for Icon Church that I'd forgotten about. It was a dream that I'd prayed about, that I journaled about, that I said, I want a church that lives like this. For whatever reason, I forgot about it. To my knowledge, I've never talked about it with the launch team or with the staff. I know I've never talked about it here in a service. But what's amazing is to see that even though I wrote that down and forgot about it, that dream still came to pass. I decided that I wanted Icon to be a church where the invisible God was made visible through the love of the people of God. As I watch you serve your community, as I watch you love people as they come in through these doors, so watch you love your neighbors, create community in this space. This is what you're doing. You're taking the invisible God and making him visible again through your love. This is the church that we become. We wrote this down long before we ever became a church. See, and this is talked about. One of the prophets of Israel wrote something down, and this was in regards to something particular that Israel was going through, and God was speaking, but the truth of this passage remains true for us today. It's found in Habakkuk 2. He says, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that the runner may read it. Here's what he's getting at. Write it down, make that vision clear. Eugene Peterson, in a paraphrase, I love what he says. He put it this way: write this, write what you see, write it out in big block letters so that it can be read on the run. This vision message is a witness pointing to what's coming. It aches for the coming. It can hardly wait, and it doesn't lie. If it seems slow in coming, wait. It's on its way. It will come right on time. See, whatever that dream is that you have, that hope that you have in your heart that maybe you've never told anyone, maybe you're embarrassed to even talk about it, write it down. Make the vision clear. Put it in front of you so that you see it every single day. Let me ask you a question. This hopefully is a clarifying question to get at what that dream, what that vision is. But what would you do if you were guaranteed you wouldn't fail? What would you do? If you could be guaranteed that whatever you try would not fail, what would it be? I remember the first time I was asked this question in a small group, and people went around and were just completely honest and vulnerable with each other. I remember one friend said, honestly, if I knew it wouldn't fail, I want to get married someday. You see, every marriage I've ever seen in my life has been a failure, and I'm afraid that that's going to be true of me too. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's to adopt or to foster. Maybe it's to start a new business. Maybe it's to go back to school. What is that thing? If you were guaranteed you wouldn't fail, what would you do? My challenge to you is go do that. Maybe it's going to have to be a side gig for a while. Maybe you're going to have to do it on the side, but write it down, make it clear. And then the second thing, once you've made it clear, the second thing you're going to have to do is a pioneer reaches the unreachable and includes the excluded. See, don't look to what everyone else has done. What we did as a church is we created this church. We began with the end in mind. And we decided we wanted to be a church that was for the unchurched and the de-churched. That was our mission. Listen, so if you're in this room and maybe you grew up going to church, you grew up religious, and then you kind of fell away and you kind of quit coming and you're kind of de-churched a little bit. Maybe you had some bad experiences at church or with pastors or other Christians and you just kind of quit coming. Or maybe church was just never your thing. You never really went to church and you found Icon, you found community, and you've connected with God because of this church. We did this for you. That everything we do is with you in mind, from the host to how we do worship to how we sing to how we talk. It's for you. And if you're in this room and you're like, well, wait, what about me? You see, I grew up in church. I've been going to church since forever, right? People like me, people like you, if you've always been in church, you know what? If Icon didn't exist, we'd find another church, wouldn't we? Right? Like, we'd be okay. We'd find another community. So we knew that those people might fall in love with Icon too. And if the unchurched and the de-church got connected to Icon, the kinds of people that we could reach. You see, we looked at Jesus and we looked at his ministry as he continued to go to the margins, the people that the religious community pushed to the outside, and that's where Jesus went. And what's unique is the early church actually followed his lead. If you read Acts, the book of Acts, it's called Acts of the Apostles. It was the very first things that the church did after Jesus left, how the church got its start. And I'm not going to read all of it, but I want to challenge you this week to go back and to read Acts chapters 8 and 9. It's really interesting because in chapters 8 and 9 of Acts, you find the first 3 actual accounts of people that joined the church. And I think it's so interesting the kinds of people that the apostles write about joining the church. You see, before that, we have stories of, gatherings of people, huge people would join the church. But the first 3 stories that are told, I don't think are told on accident. You want to know what the early church looked like, the kinds of people that were added, the first 3 stories we get of the early church? The people that joined the church, it was a wizard, a eunuch, and a church hater, right? How's that for your first church, right? Like, what would you think that on your front row of your church? You got a wizard, a eunuch, and a church hater, right? But that's the early church. The first person we hear about is Simon, this sorcerer, and he's doing magic. And that kind of person, we want people like that a part of our church? We want a wizard, a sorcerer to come to our church? The early church says, yeah, not only that, but we're going to tell stories of that person. And then one of the first converts, also an Ethiopian eunuch. As Philip, another church, or early church leader, is talking to him and explains the gospel to him, and this eunuch asks, can I get baptized? Now we have to understand, we kind of miss this, but in that religious culture of that day, a eunuch was excluded from religious life. They weren't allowed to come into the temple, into the holy places because of their sexuality, because of their gender identity. They were pushed outside of the church. But when Philip was asked, can I get baptized? Philip said, yeah, absolutely. Nothing's going to stand in the way. You can be a part of the church too. And then we get a church hater. We get Saul, this guy that his mission is to shut down the church. It said that he's breathing threats against the church daily, and he gets added in. And you see, when I see a church like this, I actually think this is my kind of church. You know why this is my kind of church? Because this is Jesus's kind of church. Look at the kinds of people that Jesus hung out with. Look at the people, he got bad reputations because he hung out with those people. Well, Jesus, if you spend time with them, well, gosh, if your church lets those people in, well, what does that mean? Jesus says, I'm bringing them in and I'm going to draw near to them, and I want to be a part of a church that does the same thing. We got to bring the gospel to those people. And in the same way, if you're going to pioneer things, you're going to have to go to places that other people haven't gone to. Listen, don't try to be someone else. Don't try to do what someone else has done, or accomplish what's already been achieved. Don't look at those things. Sure, those people can give you clues and some direction, but don't try to mimic that. When we started off as a church, we had to decide that we're going to be ourselves. We're going to lean into that. And then the third thing is that pioneers that make it never go alone. See, it's been said before that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. We had to decide that we weren't going to do this on our own. This wasn't going to be Kelly and I's church. I've never wanted this to be our thing. This is your church. We needed the team to do this. We needed a small group, a community. You heard in the announcements, in a few weeks, we're going to be encouraging, we're going to be relaunching small groups because we believe community is important. Look at what that small group meeting in a living room did in 5 years. What if we had small groups across this church, meeting across this community that had that same kind of vision, that wanted to make the same kind of impact? See, I believe that our community, that our county would be changed forever because circles are better than rows. I love it that you show up here and that we're able to be challenged and encouraged, but the real stuff of ministry happens outside of these doors. Where you get to be the love of God to people is outside of those doors, but you're going to need community to do it. So in fact, we're going to be launching some new small groups here in a little bit. But before we launch those small groups, we need some people that are willing to lead those groups. We need some people that are willing to be like that early launch team and say, sign me up. I'll be a part of this. I want to help create community for other people. In fact, in a moment, I'm going to close, I'm going to pray, and the band is going to sing a couple songs. But after service, I'm going to be standing right over here. And I'd like to open it up to all of you. Will you be a part like that launch team, willing to step out? Would you be willing to lead a small group, to create that kind of community? If that small group back then could do all of this, what could you do if you'd just be willing to say, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to lead a small group. I don't know what's required, but I'll find out more. You're not committing to anything, but would you just hear the vision that the team has to create more small groups? If you're at all interested, after service, I'll meet you over here. But wherever you're at in this room, I want you to think about that question of what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I want you to think about that. Answer it for yourself. Don't just kind of listen to my words, kind of echo through your head. Think about what would you pursue? What would you attempt if you're guaranteed you wouldn't fail? Now, what are you going to do with that answer? Some of you, your takeaway this week needs to be, maybe it's during these songs, you just write it down. You just write down, if I knew I wouldn't fail, I'd do this. You keep that in front of you. Maybe this week, that's what you do. Or maybe there's others of you that you know what that is. Yes, you write it down, but you need to go, okay, how do I bring in other people? How do I maybe do things that haven't been done, do it in a way that's never been done before? Maybe there's a well-worn path. How do I take this into the frontier and create new space for this? I'm going to have to maybe do it on the side, bring other people in. I'm going to go to the margins, go to unexpected places to do it. Or lastly, how do you find community in the midst of that? Maybe it's running a small group. Maybe it's just jumping into a small group. But you find community, not just coworkers, not people you know, not acquaintances, but people that, like Sarah said, maybe it's sometimes clash, don't always get along, but have a shared vision of the future. I believe when we get enough people together like that, with that kind of vision, with that kind of desire and drive, there's no limit to what God can do through that. See, the problem isn't on God's side. He's just waiting for us to step up. God is waiting on you. So what is it you want to do? Write it down. Find a way to achieve it by going to the margins and do it in community. So in a moment, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray over those dreams and those visions. This week, we've talked about where we've been. Next week, we're going to be talking about where we're going as a church. Before we get there, let's identify what it is that God is putting on our hearts, and let's go after it with everything we have. Amen? Let me pray for you.